God willing, Tzadikei will already transition over to the 10th and the final chapter of ERUVIN. We began at the end of last daf on daf Tzadik Gimel Amud Beis, and you know what? I think it's kedai to read it again inside. That means towards the end of Tzadik Gimel Amud Beis, a very important machlokes between Rav and Shmuel regarding whether we say kivan shehutra hutra or not. Not only is the machlokes about kivan shehutra hutra, but therefore we also put it together with other arguments that we had between Rav and Shmuel with a very interesting conclusion. And as we mentioned in the last year, this idea of walls collapsing during Shabbos, and whether we say since when Shabbos began, something was permitted, so we allow it to continue to be permitted for the remainder of the Shabbos or not, there are really two separate arguments regarding this topic. The first is what we're learning right now, and that is that a wall collapsed that changes or that disrupts eruv requirements. There's another similar topic which we will learn on Daf Tzadik Daled Amud Aleph, and that is what happens if a wall that renders an area at a Reshus HaYachid, without which it becomes a karmelis, or without which, if it's completely open to the Reshus HaRabbim, we'll see maybe some of it becomes mamish, according to Rabbi Eliezer, at Reshus HaRabbim. That's a similar argument, but it's a separate argument. In other words, whether there's a change in mechitzas that changes eruvin requirements, whether it de facto does so, or kivan shehutra hutra for that Shabbos. And similarly, we'll have on Daf Tzadik Daled whether a wall that renders an area at Reshus HaYachid collapses. Now you lost that mechitza, whether we say it continues to be at Reshus HaYachid for that Shabbos, kivan shehutra hutra or not. But anyways, we're going to begin with the machlokes Rav and Shmuel. We're going to have the topic of tzidei Reshus HaRabbim, as we'll explain. You know, there are certain areas that are near the Reshus HaRabbim that when it gets when the traffic is packed, when there's too much traffic, people begin to go into an area to their sides. So sometimes the Reshus HaRabbim actually uses that path, that location. What status does it have? We're going to learn a lot more about Pi Tikra Yored Desaisim, another machlokes Rav and Shmuel that we already quoted before, whether we say Pi Tikra Yored Desaisim to 4 walls, or maybe not to 4 walls, maybe the max is to 3 walls, or to word it better, when you already have a mechitza standing, then you can even add it to the remaining walls, but not to make an entire achsadra bebika be considered as if it is sectioned off, and a lot more. So again, let's go back a little bit, because we're mamash in the middle of this amazing sugya on Daf Tzadik Gimel Amud Beis. At the end, the last word of the 3rd line before the bottom of the Amid, Itmar. All right, Klaisel Itmar, Klaisel Shubein Shtei Chatzeres. Shenafal, a wall that separated 2 Chatzeres. Every Chatzer made their own independent internal eruv. Because of this wall, they were not even allowed to be ma'arav together. It was a wall without windows, without doorways, and now it fell in the middle of Shabbos. So first of all, at first glance, you would think, oh, maybe if the wall fell and you don't say kivan shehutra hutra, so therefore what's going to happen right now? So therefore you cannot carry from the house into the chutzner. We'll see right now even more than that, based on another machlokes we learned above. So Rav says, not only does Rav not subscribe to kivan shehutra hutra when it comes to eruv requirements being disrupted, but based on, as we'll learn, the Rashi again, because of that, Eid Metaltalin by Elabadaladamis, even something that's already in the Chatzir may not be moved Aladamis. Why? Look inside the Rashi, the 2nd line under the Gemara, Rav, right? Without the hay, 4 Amis, Rav, Leis Lei Hoil Hutra, and therefore, Uchichat Chatzir Loi Mishavin Lei. The Kaimelon Chatzir Shalei Irva Divrei Hakol Metaltalin Kalim Sheshav Sabaviram. When do we say that if Kalim are in a Chatzir, then not house Chatzir, but from Chatzir to another area in the Chatzir, there's no limitation. That's only Dahihi Kula Chadar Shusahi. That's only when it's indeed one Chatzir. But over here, since Beis Reshuyos Huasurais Zuim Zuhayum, they were 2 Chatzeres that prohibited one on the other. That is when the wall used to stand. And then Vinim says, Kol Achas now that the wall fell, each one is completely open to the neighboring Chatzer. And even though we learned above, Beilin of Meir, Bein lechachamim, bein leRav Shimon. Going back to the beginning of the Perek, that a chotzer lo chotzer is reshus achasein. But you remember, when do we say that? Another machlokes, we only say that Rav and Shmuel, according to Rav, when the chatzeros made no eruv. So therefore, even lechachamim, you can carry mechotzer lechotzer. And let's go to Rav Shimon. We take a paskan like Rav Shimon, but what did Rav say? Only when each area did not make their own internal chotzer. If a area made its internal chotzer, which heightens the possibility for people to carry from the bias to the chotzer, so we will be afraid that you're going to end up carrying manim debatim l'chotzer acheres. Right? That's exactly what we learned. Again, after the kamel on the chatzeres reshus achas hachas since b'sheir v'kolachas la'atzmas kinon and of the time made Amar Ochek Rav Shimon v'hu shalayedvu avol edvu shtei reshuya saying, wow. So putting number one, Rav does not say kiven shehutra hutra. Number two, Rav who taka paskins like Rav Shimon limits that only when there was no eruv. Here there was an eruv. Each chatzer made their own eruv. So that renders this gavaldik chumra that Rav says that a metaltal boy elabadal damas. Shmuel holds daf tzadik dalid two leniencies now. Ze metaltal adikir mechitza, v'ze metaltal adikir mechitza. Like Rashi points out, I'll say it by heart. Number two, Shmuel holds kiven shehutra hutra. So since when Shabbos came in, we were allowed to carry from the bias in this chutzner, we know where the wall stood. So until the base of the chutzner, one can carry manim debatim to the chutzner. Furthermore, adds Rashi, Shmuel l'shitasi that says halacha Rav Shimon bein erva bein lo erva will hold another leniency that if you have a keli that you know began Shabbos already in either one of these two chatzeros, that is allowed to be carried not only ad iker mechitza, that can be carried to the neighboring chatzer, that can be carried in the entirety of the area of the chatzer. Because Shmuel holds that anything that's in a chatzer, even without a native, you can carry mechatzer lechatzer. Now, if you know that something was in the bias, kiva shehutra hutra, baita no problem. So kiva shehutra hutra can only be in this chatzer. So what was in the bias can only go until the wall. That which was in the chatzer can go in the entirety of the both chatzera. It's beautiful. Now the Gemara says, v'hadarav lav befeidish itmar. It wasn't that Rav explicitly said that we don't say kiva shehutra hutra. When the Eruv wall was disrupted, Ella Michlala Itman. We do learn it via inference that Rav Shmuel have a Yosvibahu Chatzer, a Chatzer which made its own Eruv, and Nafal Guda, the Beini Obeni. This is exactly what happened. The wall that separated this Chatzer that they were in to the neighboring Chatzer fell down on Shabbos. And Shmuel l'shitasi that holds that manim debatim can continuously be carried ad iker mechitzam. Amar lahu Shmuel, says Shmuel to the chevra there, shkoilu glima, and the gidu ba, take a talis, take a garment, take a shawl, and draw it across, extend it across the place where the wall used to stand. Now we'll see, Shmuel did that litznius. The fact that he allowed to carry a glima from where they were sitting until the place of the mechitza, where the mechitza used to be, that means he for sure doesn't limit carrying bedal adamas. Faket, you can carry until, like he said, until the mechitza. When Shmuel said that, Adrinu Rav la'apei, Rav turned his face around. In other words, he demonstrated that he's unhappy with that psak din. Now we're going to get back to that detail. Like normally, if you're not happy, say otherwise. Here, Rav felt that he doesn't have, it's not his place to say anything, but he wanted to make sure that people that are watching that discussion should know that Rav disagrees. Amar lahu Shmuel rejected Rav's rejection. And he tells him, Ikapit Abba. Abba is either Lashon Kaved, or Abba was taka the name of Rav, and he was they were Chavedim, so he called him by his name. If Abba is Makbid, Shkoilu Hemiyonei Vikitruba. You know what? Take your belt and fasten my shawl even more. In other words, Shmuel pushed back the shawl, which was Litznius. You can make it even stronger because I'm right. Now, the Shmuel Aliyah, why did they have to put up a shawl? And obviously, it must be that they didn't need something to see where the mechitza used to stand. It was self-evident. So the Gemara explains, indeed, you can only carry manim debatim until the ikar mechitza, but Shmuel avid litzniusa be'almon. The advantage of a wall isn't only for Hilchas Shabbos, for Hilchas ERUVIN. It gives you privacy. Shmuel wanted to have that privacy. Now, V'Rav Isfira lay the Aser, then lay Malay. What do you mean you turn your face? The whole Shas, Rav said, Shmuel said. It says the Gemara, it was Asrei de Shmuel Hava. And therefore, since it was Asrei de Shmuel, it wasn't Rav's place to verbally argue. So so why did he even make a gesture that showed that he disagrees? The Gemara answers, people who are watching should not think that he changed his mind now and he holds like Shmuel, and that the Hadar Beimish might say that he went back, he retracted his din. And this case, when the Gemara says, Lav befedish itmer, ela mechlala itmer, sometimes the Gemara uses that lashon to point out that you didn't make a correct inference. No, here we made a correct inference. So indeed, we have a machlekes, Rav and Shmuel. Rav holds, we don't say, Kivan Shehutra Hutra, and Shmuel says that yes, we do say Kivan Shehutra Hutra for that Shabbos. Okay, now let's move on. Chatzer says the Mishnah, Shenifrat Zal Reshus Harabim. If Chatzer Shenifrat Reshus Harabim, here, my friends, we are speaking about a wall or letoisvis, walls in the plural, that broke before Shabbos. And says the Mishnah, says the Tanach Rabbi Eliezer, Amachnis mitoicha l'reshus hayachid. Now that there is one wall that is adjacent to the Reshus Harabim, or again l'toisvis walls, but let's go with Rashi. One wall collapsed. This chatzir, now I'm saying words which is only according to the Havamina, has a din of the Reshus Harabim, and that obviously will have to be explained because, first of all, this according to Rashi, this chatzir is closed by three sides, and even if not, it's not a Reshus Harabim. It doesn't have Tezayin Amo. It doesn't have people according to those shitas that hold Kiyetz and Mitzrayim. But anyways, it sounds like Rabbi Eliezer is saying that the entirety of the chatzir has the status now of a Reshus Harabim, and therefore, if you carry from this chatzir to a Reshus Hayachid to another Reshus Hayachid, or if you carry from a Reshus Hayachid to it, so then, yeah, these pictures are so hard to chap. Anyways, then Chayev, Direi Rabbi Eliezer. Good. And again, Rashi right away says, I mean, this sounds like Rabbi Eliezer is saying that it's a Reshus Harabim, and the Gemara is going to have to explain. Just because a chatzir loses a wall, even if it's open directly towards the Reshus Harabim, you can't call it the Reshus Harabim, right? We can call this a karmelis. I get it. It can lose its status of Reshus Hayachid, but to be chayiv, again, will be explained in the Gemara. The chachamim oimrim, no, metoicha l'Reshus Harabim. Oim Reshus Harabim l'toicha, patir, b'pnei shehi kekarmelis, which is what we would think. Lo ha'ir, one point, that Rabbi Eliezer was speaking about carrying from this chatzir to another Reshus Hayachid. Normally, when the Chachamim argue, which they do, they should have argued with the same case. Right? The Chachamim should have said, no, that if you carry from this, they could have said to another Reshus Hayachid, same issue. So if this chatzir has a din of a Reshus Harabim, then you'll be chayiv, which is what Rabbi Eliezer says. The Chachamim could have equally argued, saying that if you carry from this area that is open to the Reshus Harabim to another Reshus Hayachid, you'll be pater of alasr. Pater means that has a din of a karmelis. Why did they change and speak about from it to a Reshus Harabim? And indeed, because of that, the Tosfos Rid amends. It's not the girsa that we have in the Mishnah. It's not going to be according to the version that we have written in the Gemara, but just to know that some Rishonim amend the Chachamim's case to from it to another Reshus Hayachid. It's the same din, but it becomes more consistent. It's the same case of the Tanach Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, now the Gemara is asking, like we spoke out the obvious question, that Rabbi Eliezer, just because that you have a chatzir, the nifritz al Reshus Harabim, so it becomes a Reshus Harabim. More says, yeah, in Rabbi Eliezer l'taimei, the Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Oimer Mishum Rabbi Eliezer. Now, Rabbin Shebaru Derech La'atzman. Here we're speaking about a private domain which is adjacent at Reshus Harabim, and people in the Rabbim chose to regularly travel in some of that Reshus Hayachid, and that they're doing that. Now, did they simply steal it from a individual? We'll clarify that in a moment. But the rabbim, imagine right now you have your front yard, and for whatever reason, the street decides to use your front yard as part of the road. So that is the case. Says Rabbi Eliezer, so quotes Rabbi Yehuda, Mashe Bararu, Bararu. And this becomes now included in the Rishus HaRabim. So therefore, now we have a clarification. It's not that the wall fell down and the Rabbim are walking in the entirety of the Chatzar. No. But now that there's no wall, the Rishus HaRabim extended a little bit, or let's word it this way, where the wall used to stand, people are now also using as their derech. That area becomes a Rishus HaRabim. Says the Gemara, no, Eini, that V'ha'amar Rav Gidol Amar Rav, clarifying this thing that we just learned of Rabbi Eliezer, that Rabbim Shebaru Derech La'atzmam, Ma Shebaru Baru, that's only V'husha of the Lehem Derech Ba'itz HaSodem. If the Rabbim outright steal from a Yachid, even if people are using it, it doesn't render it into a Rishus HaRabim. Now, I know it's not a Rishus HaYachid, but it's not a Rishus HaRabim. When did Rabbi Eliezer say Mashu Baru Baru in the following scenario? Think about it, Chavra, like this. You have your private domain. You have a Rishus HaYachid, and it neighbors, and it's adjacent to Rishus HaRabim. There was a little sliver of your Rishus HaYachid used to be part of the derech. And the owner of the Rishus HaYachid doesn't even debate that. But there is a machlokes between the individual, the Yachid, and the city. Where was the derech? I'm saying it was in one place. The city is claiming it was in another place, and they imposed their decision that it wasn't that other place, and they began to use it again. So since they legally owned a derech, if they would just argue with me, just their claiming that it was in location A doesn't make location A a Rishus HaRabim. But if they claim it was in location A in my chatzar and they use it, now that they're using it, we say, listen, there was zicher, part of it was the Rishus HaRabim. Now they're using it as the Rishus HaRabim, that's Mashu Baru Baru. And if not for that, then just them using some of my property doesn't make it into a Rishus HaRabim. So again, our Mishnah, it doesn't answer that people are using it. They need to have a claim to it. And that's maybe also the case of the Mishnah. After the wall collapsed, the Rambam says, good, divine providence. You ganef, you put your mechitza into the road area. Now that the wall collapsed, the Rambam says we're going to reclaim what was ours. If this is the case of the Mishnah, then it won't fit with that which Rabbi Chanina said. Ha'amar Rabbi Chanina, that in our Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer is not only saying that the derech shebaruru now in my Rishus HaYachid becomes a Rishus HaRabim, but Rabbi Eliezer holds ad mekoi mechitza machlekes, which means the entire chatzar is considered a Rishus HaRabim with Rabbi Eliezer. So the Gemara now says that we have to amend the words of Rabbi Chanina. He did not say ad mokim. He said al mokim mechitza machlekes. So now we have the first understanding in Rabbi Eliezer. So there was a wall, my wall collapsed. The Rabbim are claiming that I built my wall on what used to be still the derech of the Rishus HaRabim. That's I'm claiming no. They're claiming yes. The wall collapsed. They are now reusing the location upon which the wall stood. It is only regarding that area that Rabbi Eliezer says it returns to have the status of a Rishus HaRabim, and therefore, if you carry from there to a Rishus HaYachid, then you're going to be chayiv. That's answer number one. The Iba Yisayim that B'tzidei Rishus HaRabim Kol Mifligim. In other words, that it's not about them owning, them making a claim. Tzidei Rishus HaRabim is a generic din. When the Rabbim ends, what we have today we have sidewalks. That's a great example. You know what the sidewalk does? The sidewalk goes a little bit up. The sidewalk makes it difficult for cars to go on top or for the Rabbim to use. It sections it off a little bit. What happens if there is some sort of barrier between the road and homes, but when there is a lot of traffic, people go in the area of the barrier? Does that become a Rishus HaRabim? Rabbi Eliezer Savar Tzidei Rishus HaRabim ki Rishus HaRabim Domim. And therefore, what are we adding to the first answer? The first answer of the Gemara was that only when the Rabbim claimed that they owned the place upon which I built the wall, only then is their using of that location, will that render that into a Reshus HaRabim. Even if they never claimed that they owned it. That Rabbi Eliezer holds that if the Rabbim de facto are using what used to be privately owned, but now that there's no wall, they're walking in that area. Not always, they're not Ganoven, but there's no wall. So when it gets packed with traffic, they just go in there. Rabbi Eliezer holds this now becomes part of the Reshus HaRabim when it comes to Hilchos Shabbos. We're not saying that it's publicly owned. It doesn't have to be publicly owned. That's a good statement, just a chazer that we said that so many times in ERUVIN and Shabbos, that when we say Reshus HaYachid, Reshus HaRabim for Dinei Hoitzah, it doesn't mean publicly owned or privately owned. Right? City Hall is a Reshus HaYachid. Ein l'chamakim that belongs to the city, then City Hall. But since it's mukaf with dalad mechitzas, it has a din of Reshus HaYachid. Same thing over here. It could be my property, but if everyone is using it, Rabbi Eliezer holds that becomes a halachic Reshus HaRabim for Dinei Hoitzah. And the Rabbanan hold, see, the Reshus HaRabim, lafke Reshus HaRabim. Yeah, it has a din of a karmelis, but it's not a Reshus HaRabim. And the liflake reflecting Gemara, that is the machlikas of our Mishnah. So it has nothing to do with the wall collapsing. The liflake stam b'tzidei Reshus HaRabim ba'alma. So says the Gemara, ifligu b'tzidei Reshus HaRabim ba'alma. Then I erroneously would have said that ki pligi rabbanan alei Rabbi Eliezer, that they hold sidei Reshus HaRabim is not a Reshus HaRabim. That's hanimili hecha de'iki chifufei. Like we said, normally sidei Reshus HaRabim, like today on the sidewalk, there's a step up, or they would put on sidei Reshus HaRabim certain barriers which would make it difficult for the Rabbim to spill over there, because the Rabbim knows that's not public property. And maybe the reason why Chachamim hold sidei Reshus HaRabim is not Reshus HaRabim is because even if the Rabbim de facto walk in the area right on the side of the Reshus HaRabim, it's hard for them to go with their carriages, to go with their cars, because it's very bumpy, or they have to go above a step. But maybe which is the case in our Mishnah, that now that the wall collapsed all the way down to the ground, with ease do they spill over into the area on top of the wall, to Rabbi Eliezer. So Kamash Malan, that even in our case, they never subscribe to tzidei Reshus HaRabim is Reshus HaRabim. The problem is, as we had before Rabbi Chanina, before we amended Rabbi Chanina, the words in the Mishnah is, in the second line in the Mishnah is mitoicha. Mitoicha is mashma, that Rabbi Eliezer is considering the entirety of the chatzir Reshus HaRabim. So the Gemara says, I know, Rabbi Eliezer Taka used that word, but he only used that word to be symmetric with the Rabbanan. I did Amar Rabbanan mitoicha, Amar Iyonami mitoicha, because indeed Rabbi Eli, the Chachamim hold that it's not a Reshus HaRabim, but it's a karmelis. But the din of a karmelis isn't only on top of the wall. Now that an entire wall is nifratz, the whole chatzir becomes a karmelis. The Rabbanan, the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Eliezer tzidei Reshus HaRabim u'mahadra leinu mitoicha. Who began the Mishnah? Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer clearly is not speaking about the whole chatzir. Why did they use the word mitoicha? So the Gemara says, "Hachi ka'amar le Rabbanan le Rabbi Eliezer mi loy koymoides lihecha de tiltal mitoicha l'Reshus HaRabim." Again, according to the place for Sirid, we would put here to another Reshus HaYachid, or Reshus HaRabim l'toicha de pater mepnei shi karmelis. That is their proof. So therefore, here's what you have to sort of say, Chasuri Mechsra, add on your own, Sidei Nami Loishna. However, Rabbi Eliezer says, Hassan like Kodarse Rabim. Rabbi Eliezer is Moida, that the rest of the Chatzir Tak is not a bona fide Reshus HaRabim because people are not using it. But over here, since Kodarse Bei Rabim, or according to the first answer, not the Iba Yisema, and not only that, but the Rambam claim that this used to be part of the road. You stole, you put your wall on the Reshus HaRabim. So therefore, now that there isn't a wall and people are using it, it reverts back to a bona fide Reshus HaRabim. Now, what's important is that this beautiful Mishnah Gemara was that the wall collapsed before Shabbos. And now we're going to be mamshech, the sugya we had on Daf Tzaddik Gimel, like we mentioned. Here we're going to speak about another wall collapsing now on Shabbos. But this is not a repetition of Kima Shehutra, Hutra, Machlekes Rav and Shmuel, because like we mentioned, the Gemara spoke out, I think, about Yud Zayin. I know they're similar, but they don't necessarily travel on the same track. Now we're not speaking about Dinei Eruvin, but now we're speaking about Dinei Reshus HaYachad, Reshus HaRabim. That's the hemshech of the second Mishnah of Tzadik Dalet to the first Mishnah in Tzadik Dalet. Says the Mishnah, Chotzer Shenifritzom. Here Rashi says clearly, when on Shabbos, L'Reshus HaRabim, Mishnei Ruchoiseho. So now it's opened on both of its sides. Now, why is it necessary for it to be nifratz on both sides is a huge question, right? What are we learning the whole time? Let's put Rabbi Eliezer out for a moment. We learned so many times over that any property, it affects the status of this property itself. In other words, if I can't carry out there, I cannot even carry in here. We just had this now on Daf Tzadik Gimel Amud Beis when Raf says the last line of Tzadik Gimel Ein Metaltel L'Bay Elo B'Dal Adamus. So again, we're going to see why we need to have this two walls or a house that two of its walls were breached. All of this happened on Shabbos. Notice when Shabbos began, Chatzar was called a Chatzar. It wasn't a carnivalist. Aside of the Eruv issue, it was closed from four sides. The house had a din of a bias. Or if you had a mavoi, that's the first Mishnah we had in Eruvin. Now that you put the physical koder or lechi, aside of the shitut mavais, we're speaking about the physical structure. Shabbos began when you were allowed to carry in there. So now it collapsed. So the Tanach of our Mishnah, which is Rabbi Yehuda, he subscribes here to Kiven Shehutra Hutra. He says mutarim ba'oisa Shabbos, even though va'asurim la'asalavi. Asurim la'asalavi if you don't fix it. Obviously, if you fix it, it's good. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. However, Rabbi Yossi says, now Rabbi Yossi is a little bit enigmatic, so I'll already tell you what Rabbi Yossi means, as will be explained in the Gemara later. Rabbi Yossi says, im mutarim la'oisa Shabbos, then mutarim la'asalavi. Im asurim la'asalavi, then asurim la'oisa Shabbos. Now, what does Rabbi Yossi mean? You see, it's a little bit tricky. Does he mean that since for once there was a lechi or a koida, you can even carry next Shabbos without fixing it? Or does he mean the opposite? He's being machmir, and the Gemara is going to say that he's being machmir. Rabbi Yossi means to say, since la'asad lavai, next Shabbos you cannot carry, we don't say kiven shehutra hutra when it comes to a mechitza. There was a mechitza when Shabbos began. Now there's no mechitza, so therefore the status of whether it's a Reshus HaYachid, or whether it's a carnivalist, or whether it's a Reshus HaRabim, that status changes even in middle of Shabbos. And a big question is, why did we have to speak about a Chatzir whose wall breached? Mishnei Ruchaiseha. Why did we have to speak about a bias whose walls breached? Mishnei Ruchaisav. Why isn't one breach, as long as it is large enough, it's 10 amos or less, I get it, that's a Pesach. So the Gemara says, what type of breach happened? 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Be'eser means 10 or less, 10 amos or less. Then Maishnamiru Achachas. The Amar Pischu. Now you're going to say, now I know why it has to be from 2 sides. No, just like you already know that if there was a breach in one of the walls, it is inconsequential because it's only a door. We have doors from our house to the Reshus HaRabim. It doesn't change the status of the house. And it doesn't matter if the same thing happened on the other side, right? How many people have sukkahs that in your sukkah, in one side you have a door, and another side you have a door? It doesn't invalidate the sukkah. As long as it's not more than 10 amos, you're good. And Elod must be, the last line of the Amid, especially if you hold like Rabbi Yossi, right? In other words, if the issue begins with one wall changes the status, especially when it's nifrit selam makayim ha'asula. So Amar Rav says, the Mishnah is speaking about a breach, be'esed, 10 amos or less. Turning to Daf Tzadik Daled Amid Beis. Ukigoin. Here we go, Kevan, you can put up your picture. Here we say the following. When do we say that a breach 10 or less is still considered a Pesach? That is if it broke in a location where people regularly, that's not the picture, where people regularly put doors in. But whenever you have a corner and the breach was part of one side and part on the other side, no, it's mamish where the corner breach, even if it does not amount to more than 10 ames. Since people who want to put a door never put it in a corner, you don't say, as long as it's not more than 10, it's not called a breach. This is called a breach. This is called a breach. Obvious. And why don't we say that it's a door? Because the pischa bekeren zavius lo yavadinshi gavaldik. Okay. Now, weiter the next case. These pictures, if someone has other pictures, it's so difficult to chap what's going on with these pictures. I don't know why. Same concept, if you can imagine. You have a house, and the house, when the Mishnah said that the house's walls collapse from two sides, it means a little bit from one side, a little bit on the other side where they come to a corner. It was the corner that collapsed. And therefore, again, the Gemara is going to go through the same kasha. So, but here there's another layer. What's the other layer? When by a chutzner, there's no roof. But by a house, you have a roof over it. And what will that allow us? You know what that will allow us? Oh, that's good. Leave that. You know what that should allow us? It should allow us that even if you can render this into a Pesach, so what? What about Pi Tikra? So the Gemara says, "My shlomeru achachas, do'amrinan Pi Tikra yored v'soisem." So mishtei ruchais nami lema Pi Tikra yored v'soisem. And you can't answer over here that it wasn't the Keren Zavius. Keren Zavius explains why by the Chatzar, even though it's 10 or less, it is a Pirza. But by the house, you have Pitikra. So now we're forced to add a nuance. Guys, saying that the breach is in the corner is not called adding something that's not alluded to. No, that's Taichingain. That Mishteiru Chaysav means two sides that come together the corner. Here, Rav is going to have to add a detail that is Bechlal not alluded to in the Mishnah, which is a little bit of a doichik, but there's no other option. And let me say it out by heart. We learned this in a while back, that we only subscribe to Pitikra Yored V'Soisam when the roof is laying completely horizontally flat. Now, if you can think about it, if there's a thickness to the roof, so you have perpendicular to the horizontal, and every roof you have a little bit of vertical. If that vertical is facing directly down, only then do we say Pitikra Yored V'Soisam. The moment the roof is slanted, doesn't even say how little, but if it's slanted, which means that the right angle doesn't go directly to the ground, it goes on a slant to the ground. You Bechlal cannot say Pitikra Yored V'Soisam. And indeed, Omri Devei Rav, the Yeshiva of Rav, they quoted the Rav explaining our Mishnah that it must be. Now that's already the doichik, because that's already not mentioned at all. That's number one, because without that, again, if it's not more than 10, if it's 10 or less, it's Bechlal not a breach. So number one, it was in the corner. That we accept. But now we have to add this detail. The roof of this house is not the way roofs were in the times of the Gemara, that they were flat, but they were slanted. And therefore, when it is slanted, the Shmuel, as the Gemara is going to speak out, until now, he didn't object to Rav. It didn't bother him to say that the Mishnah is speaking about two walls that are by the corner. That's fine. But now that you have to add that was too much for Shmuel. So Shmuel says, Afilu biyeser me'eser. Now I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to tell you that the breaches that the Mishnah are referring to are more than 10. More than 10. Hold on, let's go back to that. If it's more than 10, then why do we need to have from both sides? Ihachi, miruach achas nami. And the Shmuel's going to say, Gavaldik, you're right. When it comes to the Chatzir, the din and the Mishnah, especially with Rabbi Yosi, that does not say Kimin Shehutra Hutra, would be even if only one wall of the Chatzir collapses when a taka has a halachic breach. Why did we speak about two? Because by the house you have to speak about two. Mishum bayis, but we're not done yet. Ubayis gufei, again, tikshim ma'ishno miruach achas. Even if there would be a breach more than 10 on one ruach, because we would still say pi tikra yored v'soisam. So mi beis ruchais nami pi tikra yored v'soisam. And furthermore, Vesu, B'chlal mi islay l'shmuel pitikra yored v'soisam, v'ha'itmar. This is the machlokes Rav and Shmuel. They were referring to a achsadra in a bika. And achsadra b'bikra means that we just spoke this out, that you have a pavilion, or you have a portica, or you have some sort of roofed area with not a single wall. So you have this beautiful yard, or you have this bika, and you want to have a place where there's shade. You don't need walls. You don't need sneos. You don't want the sun to beat on your head. So you have 4 pillars, each one in a corner, and on top of it, you have a roof. Now, the space, it can be as big as you want it to be. If you will apply Pi Tikra Yored V'Soisam, in our case, when the roof is not slanted, Rav says that underneath the roof, Muter Letaltel Bekula, even though it's in a karmelis. What's the din in a karmelis? That midrabanan, you may not carry more than daladamas, like Ereshus Aravim. Under this achsadra, inside this achsadra, you can carry from one end to the other, because we apply pi tikra to all of the 4 sides. And Shmuel Amar, ein metaltalim elabadaladamis. So B'chlal Shmuel, it sounds like, does not subscribe to pi tikra. So the Gemara goes step at a time. For the latter kasha, I'm going to answer holy kasha. Ki leislei. When does Shmuel not hold of pi tikra? Only bidalid. When you have not even one single wall. Avol b'shalish. But when you have at least one wall, only one wall, you need to add 3 walls, then Shmuel subscribes to pi tikra. Okay, that answered the question. But let's come back to our house. Over here, don't tell me that they wrote 2 from Chatzir because of 2 on the house. Why does that affect anything? There should be no issue in the house at all. Even if it's more than 10. Even if it's 2, even if it's on 3 sides of the house. Now, the moment you say the roof is slanty, you have your answer, but that, you'll see, that is what Shmuel didn't want to say. Shmuel is going to say another thing that's not even alluded to in the Mishnah. So each one is going to have to add a detail that is not even hinted to. Rav speaks about the slanted roof, and now Shmuel will answer, in the name of Rav, just like they added something, which is not only are we speaking about Shenifratz Bekeren's obvious, and that already is hinted to when you speak about 2 walls. 2 walls can be the 2 walls that touch each other at a corner. And then they added the detail, the kiru yoiba alachsoin. So Shmuel says, I'm going to accept the first nuance, that the 2 walls aren't stam anywhere in the walls of the house. It's 2 walls that come together in a corner. Shenifratz bekeren's obvious. But now you can even look inside your Rashi to look at the picture in Rashi. Whenever a house's walls collapses at a corner, don't think it's as a beautiful surgical cut. No, it's not. The houses can collapse in a way, first of all, the opening is more than 10. Whether that's needed for the corner, it's not even needed. But let's keep to the more than 10. More than 10 amas. Aside of you having more than 10 amas, the roof on top of this breach also collapsed further in on both extreme sides. Collapsing further in on each side, we're speaking about 4 tfachim or more. If you can look at the picture in Rashi, you'll see that in order to create the inside of the house, this is very not clear, with all due respect over here. No, that's Machlal, the picture. That's Machlal, the picture. The picture is a picture of Rashi.
Ivan, I sent you a picture. If you could share it, it would be great.
In order for you to apply Pi Tikra, it's not enough for you to put 1 wall and then 1 more perpendicular, because it wasn't only that which collapsed in the walls. The roof went further in on both ends, and you have to add on each side an additional wall. So really, in order to close off the house, you have to put 4 walls. Oh, Shmuel L'Shitasai. Shmuel does not allow you to use Pi Tikra Yored V'Soisam. That's not the picture. Shmuel does not allow you to use Pi Tikra for 4 walls. Gavaldik. Now again, this detail is also not even hinted to in the Mishnah. So that's Bein L'Rav, Bein L'Shmuel. That's the way the Rishonim learn. Making the Mishnah's case of the walls at the corner, that's okay. That's not even called a doichik. But then to explain further, each one added another nuance. Each one didn't like the others because each one taka has a claim of. But this detail is not even alluded to. That detail is not even alluded to. Let's read it inside. Guys, the picture on Ashi is very good. Okay. So Nachamol Hachinami it's really ba'arba. You need to have a depth of 4 tfachim, because if it doesn't even have that additional depth of 4 tfachim, then you don't need to use the pitikra. But now you're going to need it. You're going to need to have 4 pitikras. 4 pitikras, we don't say. And the Gemara speaks out that Shmuel, very good. That picture is the picture. Whoever's looking at the screen. So a side of the 5 amas on each side, and by the way, it's not accurate. This is not accurate. Why is it not accurate? Because when Shmuel is saying that our Mishnah is their pirzas yeser mi eser, if the 5 amas are measured in the angle and the other 5 amas in the angle, when you want to see whether that's a breach of more than 10 amas, and you're going to go by alachsain, it will not amount to 10. It's going to be less than 10. So this detail is lav dafka. It doesn't matter. It's a side of it being a pirza more than 10. A side of that, some additional piece of the roof broke on each of the sides, 4 tfachim or more, and now you have to do a pitikra, a halachic pitikra, not only by the corner, but on another 2. 2 and 2 is 4, and that's what you can do. And back in the Gemara.
So what is that, Rabbi? The fact that there's 4 pitikras that we need, what's Shmuel's point about that?
Shmuel's point about that is that Shmuel does not subscribe that we put 4 pitikras. And that's why by the bias, when you have these 2 pirzas, the bias, if you don't say kivan shehutra hutra, the bias loses its status of a rishus hayachid. And by a chatzir, because of the Mishnah speaking about 2 walls by the bias, that's why the Mishnah also mentioned 2 walls by the chatzir. But the Mishnah is speaking about a pirza yeser mi eser, and by the chatzir, the same achloikas Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi will be even when only 1 wall collapsed during Shabbos. You have to say kivan shehutra hutra for you to be allowed to use that chatzir for the remainder of that Shabbos. In the Gemara, Shmuel does not say like Rav, because Allah saying b'chlal like tani. This is beautiful. It's the fact that we're putting the 2 walls at a corner doesn't bother the Gemara. That's acceptable. 2 walls doesn't say where it could be, but the roof being slanted is stumped. It's not written at all. Rav doesn't hold like Shmuel. Not because it's not mentioned. Anyways, Rav is adding an ingredient that's not mentioned. Because according to Rav, even in Shmuel's scenario, Rav does hold pitikra yored v'soisim by 4 walls. Im kein have like achsadra, and Rav lo tamid yom, and achsadra mutal lo talta b'kula. The itra nachmol achsadra b'bikam. Rav omer mutal lo talta b'kula. Shmuel omer im talta l'bo ela ba'arba amas. Rav omer mutal lo talta b'kula, because we say pitikra yored v'soisim, even by all 4, and Shmuel Amar Ames, because Lo Yamrin and Pitikra Yored V'Soisom. All right. Now we're going to add another layer to the Machlekes Rav and Shmuel, and we're going to have to modify what we said above according to 2 versions. What we said above is going to go according to the latter version. Let's go like this. Let's go back to the Achsadra Bebika, right? That we're saying that Shmuel doesn't subscribe to 4 pitikras yored v'soisim. So look at the Gemara right now. Be'eser, if the achsadra bebika, so you have, in order to place a roof, you have 4 pillars. You can put more, but they only put by each corner. How much space do you have opened in between these pillars? Will that affect the machlokes Rav and Shmuel? And you see why it could affect, because maybe if it's more than 10, then it's harder to use pitikra. Maybe if it's less than 10, maybe if the space between the pillars is less than 10, maybe Shmuel will be moida. And indeed, says the Gemara, according to the first version, that if the eser, the area between the pillars in this achsadra bebika, is 10 amas or less, kula alma loy pliga, no one disagrees. Now, look inside the Rashi, 4 lines before the bottom of the Amid. The eser kula alma loy pligi, that's Rashi. That even without using pitikra, you are allowed to carry under the roof. Why? Because you have walls. Are you kidding me? You have pillars. No. Anytime you have a pillar and the space in between is not more than 10, that's called a Pesach. Right? You have the oil of Avraham Avinu, and a Pesach and a Sari Menu, that Pesachim on all 4 sides. Interesting. Oh. Their only machloikes is biyoser me'eser. Gewaldik. let me just go back to one detail in the Gemara above. Now this will explain why Shmuel was insisting that our Mishnah is biyeser me'eser. Because according to this, if the breach is not 10, not more than 10, if it's 10 or less, well, we're saying over here, you don't even need pitikra. The Ikada Amri, second to last line in the Amid, the Yosef Kula Almaloi Pligi. Wow. Even Rav will agree that you do not apply pitikra to all four sides if the space in between the corner pillars in the Achsadra is more than 10. Their machloikis is in 10 itself. That since at least it's not what would normally be called a pirza, Rav allows you to apply pitikra, and Shmuel does not allow you to apply pitikra, and you need to have a wall. You can't say, I have a door. Yeah, there's just door. Now we had this topic in the different words above. What happens when it's parutz meruba ala amud, when it's oimen meruba ala parutz? This is a similar concept. It's a big chiddush to say that if it's be'eser kula amaloi pligi, that's a big chiddush. Kula amaloi pligi. So Rashi says that you don't need pitikra.
Loy pligi means you're allowed to carry there, right?
Everyone says you're allowed to carry. The challenge is on Rashi. Rashi says you're allowed to carry. You don't even need pitikra. Other Rishonim say you need to have pitikra, because if you have more open than closed, Shmuel, first of all, everyone knows of pitikra. What we're learning now is that Shmuel doesn't allow you to use pitikra on four sides. Okay, so here, if the four sides are not pirzad, there even Shmuel will agree that you do say pitikra. Rashi goes more than that. Rashi says the balaf stimas pitikra psachem ava. So that becomes an interesting scenario. If you don't use pitikra and you have parutz meruba ala amud on steroids, there's no walls there. Still, there is a shita here that holds that even Shmuel will hold you can carry. But anyways, the second Ikeda Amra holds that b'yasser kol ama loy pligi. Rab also agrees that you don't say pitikra on four sides, keep pligi on the esed. Based on that, now this will clarify the following statement. That the Amar Rav Yehuda, Daf Tzadikei. We have this above, my friends. Koira dalid matir b'churva. When you have a churva, we're speaking about a home that right now is so dilapidated, it's such a ruin that you have no walls and you barely have a roof. But somewhere in the middle of the house, you have on top of you, you have a beam, and the beam is wide 4 tfachim, at least wide 4 tfachim. Now, if you're going to hold, like Rav, that we apply pitikra to all 4 sides, then under the koira, you are in a bona fide reshus hayachid. Gavaldik. That's the pshat that koira dalid matir bechurva. Even when there isn't a single wall adjacent the beam on top. It's just a beam, but it's 4 amas, at least 4 tfachim, I mean. It has to be at least 4 tfachim, by 4 tfachim for you to have a reshus hayachid.
1 second, Rabbi. The rest of the churva, where you're not under the beam, but if there's walls, so is that not called enclosed?
We're speaking about a churva, like I said, that's so dilapidated that there are no walls here. All you have left is a zakoir on top. Or I'll go more than that. Or you have some of the walls, but it's nifratz b'meloyoi l'makayma asrloi. In most cases, what a churva meaning also that the walls are already collapsing, you got yourself a problem. That means that you have a karmelis. You're not allowed to carry in the churva. So nevertheless, as long as the koira has 4 tfachim, according to Rab that says you say pi tikra to all 4 sides, you can carry underneath it. Likewise, with Rav Nachman Amar Rabba Baravua, something similar that we mentioned above, if you have a koira over a boyd of mayim, remember the boyd is in between 2 chatzeros, so the koira overneath it, the beam over the boyd, we say pi tikra, and it separates one side of the boyd to the other. Matir b'mayim. We learned this in Daf Peivav. So now, Mani, who will that statement be according? This will depend on the 2 versions. Lahach lishna da amar be'eser loy pligi, that the first version that they all agreed that you could carry, as long as the wall that you are creating doesn't have to be more than 10. So then let's say that both Rav Yehuda's statement and Rav Nachman's statement is where the koira is 10, not more. That whole area is not more than 10. And that statement can go according to everyone. In order for you to enclose the area under the koira, you have to do 4 pitikras. We just mentioned, again, that's going to be difficult on Ashi. We just mentioned that if it's esed or less, even Shmuel says that that's fine. However, lahach lishna the amar that they dafka argue be'esed. So we're going to say that the koira is be'esed. But then these two statements, both of Rav Yehuda, which is fine. Rav Yehuda was a Talmud of both, of Rav and Shmuel, but he was a Talmud of Rav first. And the statement of Rabba Baravua will only go according to Shitas Rav. Because indeed, according to Shitas Shmuel, we won't say Pitikra Yored V'Soisam, and no, you will not be allowed to carry under the Kaira. No, you will not be allowed to use this Kaira as a proper separator between the two sides of the boyd, as we elaborated when we learned on Daf Pevav Amid Beis. God willing, to be continued. All right, guys, I'm coming right back, getting a coffee. We are finishing Perek Shino. All right, we're starting a bit early, but it is what it is. Good. With the help of Hashem, we are learning ERUVIN Daf Tzadik Hey. We are in middle of the machlokes between Rav and Shmuel as to how far do we push the Pi Tikra Yored V'Soisam. Rav holds that we even apply it when we have to say it on 4 sides. Shmuel holds that we only say Pi Tikra Yored V'Soisam when there is 1 wall up, or to word it differently, as we learned in the last year, that we only say it to 3 sides, but never when you have to apply it to 4 sides. I just want to add, perhaps, in Igeres Chavtes and the Alter Rebbe in the Tanya, we learn about the concept of a mitzvah. And the second idea that the Alter Rebbe explains regarding the mitzvah is, first of all, it creates a levush, but he speaks about that there is a roof, which is the concept of kesed, and it is the mitzvah that connects the kesed all the way down to Olam Hazeh. And perhaps, if you think about it, if you have the amudim that we create every time you do a mitzvah, upon which you have the kesed, if we're going to add to that shitas Rav, that Pi Tikra Yored V'Soisam, I'm sure that there's some sort of connection over here. It just means that we are, so to say, under the shade of the Shechina substantially more when you subscribe to Pi Tikra on all 4 sides. The Gemara on Daf Tzadik Hey is going to refer back to the Mishnah on Daf Tzadik Daled, where we had the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. I know when we learned the Mishnah, we already explained Rabbi Yossi as the Gemara does, but the words of Rabbi Yossi is not clear. Rabbi Yehuda clearly does not hold, Rabbi Yehuda holds that Kivan Shehutra Hutra, that when there was a breach on Shabbos, at least, but Oysa Shabbos, it is Mutarim. And Rabbi Yossi Shita will be clarified on Daf Tzadikei. We're going to learn the last Mishnah in Perek Shi, and that's going to be another Shita of Rabbi Yehuda that we quoted many times above, that if you have two walls in between which there is a Reshus HaYachid, only two walls, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the area in between Midai Raisa is rendered into a Reshus HaYachid, and therefore even on a Derabanan level, as long as you put some sort of reminder, like a lechi on each extremities, then mamish you will be allowed to carry, even though it's being breached by a Reshus HaRabim. So if you have a house on this side of the street and a house on the other side of Reshus HaRabim street, you would, especially if it belongs to the same person, then you will be allowed to carry from one to the other if you put a lechi mikan and a lechi mikan. Now, the 10th chapter is really more about Hilchos Hoitzah, to the point that we'll learn the Tosfos inside that wonders why is the 10th chapter Bechlal placed in ERUVIN. It should have been placed in Masechta Shabbos. The case of the Mishnah is that if a person is going out there on the street and they find a pair of tefillin laying there, and there's a certain fear that the tefillin will become desecrated either by listim, either by goyim, as we'll learn more details in the later shiurim. So there's certain hetadim that Chazal gave us, which will allow us to bring the tefillin back into a Reshus HaYachid to keep them safe, wearing one pair at a time, perhaps wearing two pairs at a time. So as we had a sugya in Menachos regarding tefillin, the next big sugya in the whole Shas is going to be on the last Perek in ERUVIN. A lot of halachis of the Hilchos Tefillin will be learned over here. We're going to have the machlokes, whether Shabbos is man tefillin, whether it's lav's man tefillin. That's going to be a big factor in our sugya. We're going to quote this concept that makim yesh baroish lohaniach boy shtei tefillin, as indeed some people do that until today. We're going to see whether we apply this also to a tefillin shal yad, whether yesh makim b'kiboides or biyad to wear to tefillin. And we're going to have at the end of the daf the big machlokes, whether mitzvah is tzrichas kavana or ein tzrichas kavana, and how that affects the lav of Baal Tosef and a lot more. We left off on daf Tzadikei Amud Aleph, 5 lines from the top of the Amud. Again, we just quoted 2 versions, but in the machlokes of Rav and Shmuel regarding applying pi tikra yored v'soisem to 4 sides or only to 3 sides, not to 4 sides. So now, where do we have Hilchas Mechitza Be'ikr? When it comes to Shabbos, we have dinim of Mechitza when it comes to Kalayim, as we learned in the past few daf, and we also have a substantial sugya of Hilchas Mechitza when it comes to Hilchas Sukkah. So says the Gemara 5 lines from the top that Lema, Abaya, and Rava that are having a machlokes and Hilchas Sukkah, their argument is a continuation of the argument of Rav and Shmuel. Perhaps. What is the argument of Abaya and Rava when it comes to Sukkah? The Itmar, it was stated, if you have again, you have this achsadra that's completely opened, but you have patsimin means posts, as we had in the picture in the last year. To have an achsadra, even if you have no walls, you have to have pillars. Now, how thick are those pillars? How many pillars do you have? So like this, if you have pillars that are placed within 3 tfachim, one of the other, b'chlal, the opposite of that picture that's on the screen. In other words, as we continuously learn the sugya of lavud, even if it's not a wall, but if the pillars are placed, there's less than 3 tfachim space in between one and the other. So then, no doubt, these are bona fide mechitzos, and therefore, if you place schach on top of it, then you have a kosher sukkah. You have 4 walls and you have schach. However, ein la patzimin doesn't mean that there are no posts. It means that you don't have this lavud. You can have more than the 4, but if you don't have them in a way where there's only less than 3 tfachim in between one and the other, so now the question is, do you have walls or not? Now, using the schach for walls is for sure out of the question. Just giving you one reason for it, and that is that when you build a sukkah, first you have to have walls, and then you have to have the schach. That's the klal. It's very important. These are one of the things that passes the sukkah that's not even discernible to the eye. If a person first put on the schach and only then they put up the walls, then you don't got yourself a kosher sukkah. So here we're not speaking about using the schach for pi tikra, but this achsadra, you have these outer beams upon which the normal roof is placed. Can those beams on the roof, at the extremities, at the perimeter of the roof, can you use that to say pi tikra yored v'sois? That's the machlokes between Abaye and Rava. Abaye says that it's kosher, even though there's no physical walls. Rava says it's possible. So l'chora, Abaye holds that it's kosher. Let's say Abaye will hold like Rav, because he'll subscribe to pi tikra yored v'soisem like Rav does on all four sides. Rava says psula. L'chora, Rava will subscribe to Shmuel. L'yomer pi tikra yored v'soisem. And l'chora again, lema Abaye kirav Rava kishmuel. Now let me just add another nuance. When we learned the last sugi in the last daf about Shmuel, first of all, we said that Shmuel doesn't apply it. Shmuel doesn't apply it to four sides. But why do you have to apply it to four sides? For a sukkah, you don't need to have four walls. So we always have to add another detail. Shmuel holds there has to be a wall there. And the way we learned the Gemara in the last year, even when you have other walls there, even then, Shmuel doesn't allow you to apply it if you have to make four walls. In addition, that was the whole beautiful case of the house that had a very interesting type of roof, that if you're going to make pi tikra, you're going to have to do four pi tikras, even though the rest of the house's walls are standing. But coming back over here in this achsadra, since there isn't one single wall, even though a sukkah doesn't need to have four walls, doesn't matter. If you don't have any walls, Shmuel doesn't hold to pi tikra yored v'sois. And l'chayra, that is the machlokes. And the Gemara says half of your statement is correct. According to Shmuel, right, that does not apply pi tikra if you don't have even one wall. You're right. Aliyah the Shmuel kula amaloi pligi, that what? That Shmuel's statement must follow Rav. Shmuel's statement, I'm sorry, Abaye's statement, Abaye says, Ksheda, according to Shmuel, Abaye is following Rav. If Abaye would have followed Shmuel, he never would have said that this is kosher. Again, even though you don't have to make four walls, because if you don't have one single wall, you're not going to do pi tikra. However, in other words, ki pligi, Aliyah the Rav, very good. Ki pligi, Aliyah the Rav, that Abaye kirav, well, I think I skipped a line. No, Aliyah the Shmuel like pligi, pligi. Ki pligi, Aliyah the Rav, that what? That Abaye taka will hold like Rav. That's clear. However, Rava can also hold like Rav. Rava can hold like Rav. Now, if Rava were to hold like Rav, why is it that by Sukkah, Rava says that you cannot just place chach on this achsadra? Because Rava will say that at kan loika amar Rav hasam elam dahani mechitzas la achsadra avida. Rav's pi tikra, when it comes to the machlokes that we were speaking about, when you have the roof, why was the roof? The roof was placed for you to have, so to say, an area under the roof that is protected from the elements, it's protected from the sun, it's some sort of privacy. So since the roof placed for Hilchas Shabbos on top of the achsadra was placed for the achsadra, so that we use this halacha l'Moshe Messinai, it's not only roof, but it's also walled. But over here, since the hani mechitzos lav l'suka avide, this achsadra babika, the outer beams that we want to use for these mechitzos, they were not placed for a sukkah, they were placed for an achsadra. Perhaps even Rav, that will be the shita here of Rava, will be moidem that we don't say b'chlal pi tikra yored v'soisam. Wow. Because you're trying to use these walls for a sukkah. No, for that you have to build a wall for a sukkah. So when the ceiling was not built for a sukkah, so therefore you cannot extend the ceiling as for walls of a sukkah. Masha'inkin for Hilchas Shabbos, the ceiling was built for an achsadra. Perfect. So whatever the kavanah of the roof is, that continues downwards. It's to give you protection. It's to give you some sort of privacy. For a sukkah, you have to build it for a sukkah. None of it was built for a sukkah.
What does that mean? That means if you have a pre-built deck with a covering that you put schach on top, that's not kosher according to this opinion because it's not built dafka for a sukkah?
No.
That's what we're saying?
No, we're saying when you have the physical sukkah up, we're going to learn a lot in Hilchas Sukkah, that's a sukkah yeshena, that's much less problematic. But here you're trying to create pitikra yored v'soisim, you're creating halachic walls. You can't create halachic walls from something that was not placed for a sukkah. That's the difference.
And do we have the Gedim issue? Does that not apply here, or do we say Rav doesn't care about that?
This is something that we quoted all the way, I think on that base, which is phenomenal. Again, we're just saying some of the opinions, but many of the Rishonim point out from here and from many other cases. You think about it. We kept on learning about a good asik. And every time we learned about, not good asik, good nachis, that the wool goes down. Now, if the wool doesn't have to go down to the ground, everyone holds of good nachis, good achis, everyone holds of that. But if you need to have the wool going down at least up to the ground, we learned many times over. By Mayim, there's a kulam. We don't care about the fish on the ground. Everyone cared about that Gedim Boikenboy. For some reason, we don't say that by Pitikra. If not, Danny, you never have a Pitikra. If not, you never have a Mechitza. Even for Hilchas Shabbos, not only for Hilchas Sukkah. Hilchas Shabbos, a Mechitza means from the ground up 10 Tvachim. It's not beginning on the ground. Okay. So there's no problem. Bottom line is, by the Pitikra Yored V'Soisam is not broken with the Gedoyim Boikenboy. However, Shmuel has its own limitations. You don't say it for 4 walls, even if there are other walls. On the other hand, if there is no wall, you b'chlal don't say it. Not even to make 2.5 walls, 2 walls on a tefach. It has to be. You're
saying it's not broken by the Pitikra by Shabbos.
It's not
right. But I'm saying we're extending this machlokes of Rav and Shmuel into Sukkah, where Rav and Abaye are talking about. But shouldn't we? Everyone agrees that by Sukkah, the Gedim Boikenboy is a problem.
No. If you're using Pitikra, no. Only if you're using good achis. And let me word it differently. According to what we're learning over here, if someone were to build in their backyard, they were to build a frame for a sukkah, and therefore the outer beams on the top, all of that is being built for the sukkah, then perhaps it's going to be a kosher sukkah. Here, you're using a achsadra that was not built for sukkah. And again, Yadani, you made a good point. We're not saying over here that a sukkah yeshana, we'll learn that sukkah in Masechta Sukkah. We're not saying that a sukkah yeshana is problematic. We are saying is that don't forget there are no walls. If you want to extend the walls down for a sukkah, then it has to come from a ceiling that was built for a sukkah. The ceiling was not built for a sukkah. Okay, weiter. Now, Rabbi Yossi, referring back to the Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi says, he didn't say clearly you can't use it. It broke. We don't say kiva shehotra hotra. Rabbi Yossi says, im mutarim, I'm reading back on Sadik Dalet. Im mutarim leisa Shabbos, mutarim leisa lavai. Im asurim leisa lavai, asurim leisa Shabbos. So they asked in the yeshiva, Rabbi Yossi, le'esor le'hated, it's nishkor. So Amar Rav Sheish is le'esor. Chein Amar Rabbi Yechanan, like we said, le'esor. Since it's not going to be permitted for next Shabbos, therefore, it's not permitted for this Shabbos as well. Tayanami hachi, clearly, not only in the Rav Sheish's, but we have from a Tanach. Omar Rabbi Yossi, Kashem sha'asurim la'asud lavai, kach asurim la'isa Shabbos. Very good. Says the Gemara Itmar. Rab Chia bar Bachemens bar Ashi. Omar Rav. I just read inside the Bach. Halachic Rabbi Yossi. That means that we're machmer. We don't say kimish utra hutra when the mechitza that will make this area into ereshus hayachid is no longer here during middle of Shabbos. So that's Rav. Very good. Shmuel says no, we're lenient. Shmuel amar halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore carrying in all of the 3 cases in the Mishnah will be permitted on the Shabbos. Asks the Gemara, did Shmuel say that? Umi amar Shmuel hachi. Second wide line, we learned above Daf Pei Aleph that Omar, this is all a Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda, we're speaking before about me placing for you a ERUVIN tchumen, and even if I'm being mizakeh the food for you, nevertheless, I need to have your consent, like we explained, because whenever you place the ERUVIN tchumen, you're not giving that person more area to walk in. you're changing the goalposts. But if he can walk more to the Ma'ariv, then he can walk less to the Mizrach. That's why you need to have their consent. But since there is no downside, you only benefit. So therefore, you have to make a kinyan, as we learned. However, you make a kinyan, but you don't need to have the consent, because that's for the Eruv Chatzeros, and consent is needed because it's a chav if you don't want it to be in that place. Okay, number one. Then, for Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, halachic Rabbi Yehuda, has nothing to do with our case. But wait, and v'lo yoid. But here Shmuel added that kol makim shoshana Rabbi Yehuda be'eruvin. Anytime you have a machlokes tanoim and one side is from Rabbi Yehuda, halach is like him. We're not done yet. And v'amar Rab Chana bagdita. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, are you telling me that this even applies to our case? The Mavoish, which is the third case in the Mishnah. Ben Mavoish shenitul kairoiso elochayav. That what? That we paskin leniently. And v'amar lei. Wow, this is Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. In the name of Shmuel, he's responding, no. That only be'eruvin omarti loch. By Hilchas Eruvin, and like we kept on pointing out in the last two daf, that the machlokes on Daf Tzadik Daled Amud Aleph, it sounds like, but it's not the same machlokes we had on Daf Tzadik Gimel regarding if the koisel in middle of two chatzeros fell, whether it affects the status of an eruv. That's hoil v'hutra hutra. Machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Rav says we don't say hoil v'hutra hutra. Shmuel says we say regarding Hilchas Eruvin. The machlokes on Daf Tzadik Daled is not concerning Eruvin; it's concerning the Reshus HaYachid, the Reshus HaRabim. And clearly he said, in other words, he's basically saying that when it comes to this machlokes, Shmuel said, we don't follow Rabbi Yehuda. How can you quote me that Shmuel said here in our Mishnah that we follow Rabbi Yehuda? So indeed, we have a contradiction, and therefore we have to say a new nuance, a new detail. When we are quoting that Rabbi Yehuda does Shmuel paskins like Rabbi Yehuda, which is the first wide line. Now the Mishnah on Daf Tzadik Daled that speaks about a wall breaching to what? What is the neighboring location? That's something that we never spoke out. I know by the Mavi, normally a Mavi is open to a Reshus HaRabim, but that will not, now we're saying it depends. Interesting. Whenever your current location opens up to a Reshus HaRabim, there, Take, we are not going to be lenient. There, Shmuel is not going to paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. That is where he said, no, not by mechitzas. When we learned now on the first wide line that Shmuel says regarding our Mishnah, halach is like Rabbi Yehuda, that's only if the current location whose mechitza fell is opened only to a canomalis, which means that even if there had never been a wall there, and if someone would have carried mikan l'sham, they would not have been violating any Isur D'Oraisa. Wow. Look at new nuance. So if there's no Isur D'Oraisa involved, here we take our lenient, and we can paskin like Rabbi Yehuda that even midrabanan you can carry inside this location. Kivin shehutra hutra. Kan, when we just quoted Rab Chana Bagdita, who got the response that when do we say that kol makim shoshana Rabbi Yehuda be'eruvin halacha k'mais is dafke by eruvin and not for hilchas mechitzos, that will be in a scenario where this wall that collapsed during Shabbos now created a breach into a Reshus HaRabim. And here he paskins like Rabbi Yossi that we don't say, but since la'asad lavai, without you fixing it, which will be the normal case of a lechi and a mavi, a lechi and a koida. Normally, all of the mavis that we are speaking about, I mean, you can have a mavi open to a cardinalist, but normally we're speaking about a mavi open to a Reshus HaRabim. No, here Shmuel also will say like Rav that halacha is like Rabbi Yossi, and that is a huge, because my friends, in other words, what happens if an eruv collapses during Shabbos? Part of the eruv that can happen. And that's a big thing. So just to know that Rabbi Yehuda, not Shmuel, when he picks us, when he limits, Rabbi Yehuda holds kivin shehutra hutra. The problem is we pass on like Rabbi Yossi. If I'm not mistaken, there were certain systems in certain locations how they notified people if the eruv collapsed. I'm sure you have this in camps where the eruv is discernible. I'm not saying that you have to go look for a problem, but if you discover a breach in the eruv, this is mamish, this is a big machlokes. Wow. And if we paskin like Rabbi Yossi, which we do, as we can see here in the Ein Mishpat, both the Maimonides and the Turba Shulchan Aruch, that if an Eruv collapses during Shabbos, we do not say Kivan Shehutra Hutra. Okay. Says the final Mishnah in Perek Shi. And yes, we quoted a detail of this Mishnah many times earlier. But let's begin. Says the Mishnah, right, Kaven, whoever has a picture, I hope the picture will be clear. Haboina Aliyah al Gabi Shnei Batim. If you have two houses, my friends, two houses on opposite sides of a Rishus Harabim, and someone built an Aliyah not on top of a house, great picture, the top picture to the left, but you built a house that mamish goes over the Rishus Harabim, Now, let's use just Pitikra. Forget about another detail that we quoted so many times, that according to Rabbi Yehuda, by the very fact that you have a wall on one side of the Rishus Harabim and a wall on the other side, that already renders the area in between these two houses Mida Ayraisa as a Rishus Hayachid, even though people are walking there the whole time. People are breaking through the Rishus Hayachid. Doesn't matter. Put that aside. You don't even need it. Here, let's go with Pitikra. This is a classical case of Pitikra, Yored V'Soisim. If you use Pitikra, how many walls do you have inside this area? 4 walls. 2 walls from a physical house and 2 halachic walls of Pitikra. And similarly, you have a Chen Gesharim HaMifulashim. If you have a picture for that, if not, you can just imagine. Gesharim HaMifulashim would mean when you're going La Cienega north to south and you're going under the 10 highway, so there's like an overpass. But when you're going underneath it, not only do you have walls on both sides, the Gashmias upon which the overpass is going, but the overpass itself, if you use Pitikra Yored V'Soisim, by the way, we're going to use it according to everyone, because here you have 1 wall, which is good for Shmuel. You don't need to use 4. You only need 2. Then any area underneath the overpass, it was mamish like the picture of the area under the Aliyah al Gabi Shnei Batim. So says the Rabbi Yehuda, Metalpulin Tachteim B'Shabbos Did Rabbi Yehuda. Now there's a novelty here. You know what the novelty is? Because Danny, forget about Gedoyim Boikenboy. Here we're speaking about the whole road is going through it. It's much worse than Gedoyim Boikenboy. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't care. The Chachamim don't allow you to use it. Midrabanan. Don't forget, you are mamish on a road. Now, Rabbi Yehuda, that ma'arvin l'mavi mefulish. This second statement, there's no here Pitikra Yored V'Soisim. When we began Mishnah Aleph, Perek, the first Mishnah, on Daf Beis, and we spoke about a lechi, we spoke about a koira. We made it clear that we're speaking about a mavui that's closed from 3 sides. It's only open to the Rishus Harabim. There is that we were kept on saying, putting a koira, putting a lechi is enough. But if the mavi would have been open on the other side as well, so people can go through it, not Rabbi Yehuda, a lechi and a koira would not work with all of the shitas that we have, whether you're Beishamai, Beisilul, Tzuras HaPesach, a wall, a door, v'chulei. Rabbi Yehuda is the one that holds, again here, based on Rabbi Yehuda's shita, that when you have 2 walls on opposite sides, the area in between the 2 walls becomes a bona fide Rishus HaYachid. Yes, it's open to a Rishus Harabim. All you need to do is you need to place a mavui, you need to place a koder lechi, and when you place that, you can make a proper eruv, because it's a real Rishus HaYachid. And here the Chachamim aser, because the Chachamim hold that when you have walls on 2 sides and a path is going through it, that's not an area for which B'chlal any sort of eruv will be helpful. Now, when you read the Reisha of the Mishnah, using what we know now, which is Shitas Rabbi Yehuda, that just 2 walls on each side, even of a Rishus Harabim, renders the area in between into a Rishus HaYachid, you can also explain the Reisha of the Mishnah. Why does Rabbi Yehuda allow you to carry under the Aliyah, under the overpass? Because you have 2 walls. But you don't need, that's not the only reason. It's because of Pitikra, like we mentioned. So Amar Rabba, Loi Tema, we're speaking about the Reisha, under the Aliyah, under the overpass, that Hainu Taima de Rabbi Yehuda Mishum de Kosavar Beis Mechitzas do Eraisa, which is Emes, he holds that. But that's not the reason for the Reisha. In the case of the Reisha, Rabbi Yehuda is leaning on the Pitikra. And when you have the Pitikra, you have 4 walls. So when Abaye heard Rabbi saying that, he thought that Rabbi is implying that Rabbi Yehuda does not subscribe that when you have 2 mechitzos, then it already at least midoiraisa renders the area in between into a reshus hayachid. How can you say that? Esvei Abaye, we learned in a brayso. This was the brayso that we quoted many times above. See in Davav, and Shabbos Davav, Shabbos Kuf Yud Zayin, before in Davav and Daf Yud Beis and Daf Chav Beis and Daf Muntes, that Yasser al Kain Amar Rabbi Yehuda, not only under the overpass, not only under that house that they built weird over the Reshus Harabim, but Mi Sheyesh L'Shnei Batim Shnei Sidei Reshus Harabim. Rabbi Yehuda holds that since Aleph Midoiraisa to Reshus Hayachid, true, people are going through it. So all you need to do is to put a lechi on both sides, either a lechi mikan or lechi mikan, or a koyde mikan, and v'noisen be'emtza. Now, what about Eruv Chatzeres? So just say he's speaking about you own both houses. It's owned by the same person. And Omrullah the Chachamim disagree with Rabbi Yehuda because they say ein ma'arven reshus harabim bekach. Midoiraisa it's still a reshus harabim. If an area is not sectioned off by 3 sides, l'chachamim, it's still a reshus harabim. So Abaye is telling Rabbi Yehuda does hold that if an area has a mechitz on one side and a mechitz on the other side, it is at least midoiraisa in a reshus hayachid. So Rabbi says, I know that. Amalei mehahi in from the brayso clearly that is shittas Rabbi Yehuda. What Rabbi meant to say is meha, when you learn the reisha of the Mishnah, leka lamashma mino, you can't extrapolate that Rabbi Yehuda subscribes to the shita because in our Mishnah, the reasons for Rabbi Yehuda can be based on Pitikra. And Omar Rav Ashi, I'll prove that what Rabbi is saying is correct, that the reisha of the Mishnah is because of Pitikra, and only the second statement is taka based on the 2 walls, let Rabbi Yehuda. Because Diktani, since the Mishnah gave another case, it's not 2 examples or 3 examples in the Reisha. First it gave a Reisha, and then the Mishnah said, and the Chachamim Aser. Now, that the Reisha of the Mishnah is because of Pitikra Yored V'Soisa. By the Seif of the Mishnah, there's no roof. So now we're adding a new din, which doesn't have the Pitikra. It mamish is beautiful. You needed a new case. But Eli Amra, that even in the Reisha of the Mishnah, the reason why Rabbi Yehuda says that you can carry under the overpass is not because of Pitikra, but because you are in between 2 walls. You don't need a lechi and a koida because you have the overpass. That ain't lecha lechi the koida gadol misa. But if it's the same din, it's the same case. If you wanted to mention 3 cases, but put them all together. Say Haboina Aliyah al Gabashnei Batim, V'chein Gisharam Mifoloshim, V'chein. He could have said, you have, the last case of the Mishnah. Why are you ending the first and then starting with a new one? Is indeed Shmamino that Rabbi said very good. When you learn the Reish of the Mishnah, we're using Pitikra. And by the way, L'chacham and Pitikra won't be good enough. Why won't it be good enough? Because it's a Achsadra Bebikra, even Larav, that you say Pitikra when there's not a single wall. That you say Pitikra for all 4 walls, you are in a bika, you are an economist. You are an economist. When we spoke about a churva before, that you have a koida on a churva, we're all speaking about you are an economist. But we do not say this in the Reshus Harabim. This is much more than Gedoy and Boikeboy. Here you are under the Reshus Harabim. That's the word. So according to, you have to have both together. Notice the Reish of the Mishnah isn't only Pitikra, but it's also Pitikra. Notice you have a Reshus Hayachid Midoiraisa. Now you have Pitikra, you can carry because of Pitikra. Then the Seif of the Mishnah says that even if you don't have Pitikra, by the very fact that it's no longer the Reshus Harabim, because Rabbi Yehuda Taka holds the Seifa, or like the Braisa, that 2 walls in a Reshus Harabim, that means that the derech goes through it, is a Reshus Hayachid Midoiraisa, not Midrabanan, but yes Midoiraisa. So now you need to have something else. And it doesn't, Pitikra is a Chatoiv Manoim. V'oid, not even a Pitikra, even just a Lechimikan.
Rabbi.
Gagos, will come back to you, Kol Gagos. Yes, Danny.
So if the case of no Pitikra is obviously, let's say it's a bigger Chiddush,
yes,
according to Rabbi Yehuda.
Yes.
So what's the whole point of Rabbah saying that The initial case we're talking about pitikra, is that to just show that the Chachamim argue even in that case where there is pitikra? Meaning, why wouldn't we just say the case of the 2 walls, no pitikra? And if you know that in that case, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you could carry. So of course, if you have a house on top and you have pitikra,
because
so for sure you could carry.
That's what one might have said, that Rabbi Yehuda holds that you say pitikra even in a Rishus Harabim. That's what Rashi says. You can't prove the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda from the Mishnah. One would have argued erroneously that the whole thing is pitikra. Now that we learned the Mishnah, now we know that it's based on 2 dinim. What are the 2 dinim?
I'm saying if you know only the second din, who cares about the first din? Who cares about pitikra? You have 2 walls, and now you're good.
That's called one.
If you say the more extreme case, then you know the more lenient case.
No. If I care, the reisha is easier to be matil al Rabbi Yehuda.
Exactly. So I'm saying if we know that Rabbi Yehuda holds that you can carry in a case where there's no pitikra, for sure. If you have also pitikra,
but that's the seder of Mishnayos. It's mamish like the Brisa. The Brisa writes the words Yasser al Kein Rabbi Yehuda. It's beautiful. Rabbeinu HaKadosh didn't write the words Yasser, but now we know it's Yasser. It's the same concept. In other words, you get why the Yasser of the Brisa is included in our Mishnah. Din number 1, din number 2. The lesser Chiddush to the bigger Chiddush. No doubt the second din of the Mishnah is a much bigger Chiddush. Okay, like we mentioned in the introduction, we're learning now laws of Hoitzah. It's amazing that Masechta Shabbos, how about the 7 prakim about Hoitzah, then later Vaiter HaZoyrek and HaMoishet. Look how much about Hoitzah. The Nakuda of the last chapter of ERUVIN, we're coming back to Hilchos Hoitzah. What we are using is where the Chazal allowed us to put aside an Isur Derabanan of Hoitzah when there's a need, we don't want tefillin to get desecrated. Before we read, we'll go out of the order. Before we read the words of the Mishnah, let's look in the first place. The first place was on the 10th Pedic. Hamoitzet tefillin, a person found, if you find tefillin, says Toysus Hasahach Pirka, the Masechta Shabbos, Havalei Lemisnei. Gabe, all of the many Purakim that taught us Dinei Hoitzahs. So Toysus explains why is it put over here. Elamishum Diktani Seifa in our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Noisen Adam Lachavere V'Chavere Lachavere Afilu Chutz L'Tchum. As we'll speak out in a moment, there is a certain nuance in which the Mishnah is saying that again, L'Tzoyrech Tefillin not becoming desecrated, we can also, in a limited way, not be bound by Tchumen. So there is a certain Tchumen aspect. That's why it comes in Masechtas ERUVIN. V'oid, another din we'll have later in the Pedic, which is also connected to ERUVIN. But really, just to be aware that we're coming back to the basic dinei of Hoitzah. So let's go, Chavre, in the new Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, since the final Pedic. Hamoitzi tefillin. A person finds tefillin. And now we are afraid that the tefillin will become desecrated. We will, God willing, learn. Are we speaking about you are afraid of goyim? Are we speaking about listim? We'll see details. It's going to get desecrated. So what do you do as machnisan zug zug? You may not carry them. Carrying is an isur d'oraisa. But if you're going to wear them, now wearing tefillin on Shabbos is problematic. Why is it problematic? We'll speak more in the Amud Beis. Whether it's tefillin, if you say that midah eraisa, you can wear tefillin on Shabbos, just for example. Shabbos is man tefillin, but the Chachamim said don't wear tefillin on Shabbos because they were afraid that you might accidentally take them off while you're wearing them and then carry them. Midrabanan, you can't wear tefillin on Shabbos. Or midah eraisa, Shabbos is lav zman tefillin. So why are you wearing it? But on the other hand, you can argue that even when there is no mitzvah to wear tefillin, already midah eraisa, nevertheless, if you wear it derech malbush, it should have a din of a malbush, of a tachshit. Now, all of that is something that we normally do not subscribe to. But if you were to wear it, Bain, if it's also because midrabanan you might carry it. Bain, because there's bechlal no mitzvah, but we don't want you to wear it because you don't have to wear it. But if you do wear it, it's not the end of the world. It's like a tachshit, it's like a malbush. Chachamim said not to do it. The Chachamim allowed you to do it to save it. But how much? Zug zug, a pair at a time. Pair at a time means one hand and one head. So if you find a bunch of tefillins, you find 4 pairs of tefillin, you can't in one time wear all of them. You can't even wear 2 at a time. one at a time. Zug, one pair means one shal yad, one shal rosh. Rabban Gamliel says shnayim. We'll see soon their machlokes. Shnayim means you can put on at the same time 2 hand tefillin and 2 head tefillin. Not more than that, but shnayim. We'll see many reasons for this machlokes. Now there's another nuance over here. It was common in the times of Mishnais and Gemara that people made certain types of amulets, kameas, but they mamish were placed inside a pair of tefillin. When you looked at someone wearing it, it could have been a kameya. Nothing, we're not saying that one should desecrate a kameya, but you can't compare. This is tashmisha kedusha. This overlooking, the Chachamim allowed us to push aside some sort of Isur D'Rabbanan is only when you know that you're saving tefillin. If in the worst case scenario, a kameya, an amulet that looks like tefillin will get desecrated, that doesn't justify you wearing it, even like the Chachamim zug zug. How would you know, how did they know whether something is tefillin or a kameya? It's amazing. The types of knots that we make in the ritzuos of the tefillin, everyone has their minig. There's a dalid, there is a yud. It sounds like they also, some of them made some sort of shin knot. They only made those ksharim if it was tefillin. The next lines in the Mishnah is referring to tefillin whose ritzuos and their knots were completely undone. They were unknotted. But you know something, if the tefillin was knotted for a substantial amount of time, this we know, even after you take out those knots, the imprint of those knots remain in the ritzuos. So even if what you found is not knotted, that since they are yeshanois, they are old tefillin, you can see that they had the knot of, Rashi says, of shin and daled and yud. So you know they're tefillin, so because of the kavod we want to give to the tefillin, preventing them from being desecrated, we can do something that otherwise would have been us in midrabanan. Abul b'chadashos, which means that this what you found is new. Again, if they're knotted, then you know if they're knotted the way our tefillin are knotted, that indicates they're tefillin. But the Mishnah is speaking about where the ritzuos were unknotted. Now, if they're unknotted and it's brand new ritzuos, you don't know what they are. You have a doubt b'chlal whether it's tefillin, and therefore, abul b'chadashos patur means you don't have to save them. Look inside Rashi, 3 lines from the bottom. Abul b'chadashos patur mila hachnisam. You're not mechuyev because dilma kameya hein ba'alma, and therefore ve'ein behem kedusha. Kedusha is only b'na'asim kil chasan v'hainu lishman hilkach. Patur normally means that you're not obligated to take them in, but you would think from these words, but if you want to, you could. So Rashi says, no. What the Mishnah means to say is hilkach loy mechalinan shapsa alayu. You may not violate Shabbos midrabanan, which is what you are doing when you're wearing tefillin, if you're not given this heter. Patur really means you're not allowed to save them. You have to leave them. Now, matzoy tzevasim, if you found tefillins, in plural, tied in pairs, oy krichos, or in bundles, the Gemara later will explain what these 2 cases mean. They both have one commonality. There's so many of them that you will not be able to bring them all in, not even following Rabbi Gamliel. There isn't enough time to go back and forth and back and forth. But you're obligated to make sure that tefillin is not desecrated. So over here, machshech aleim, you have to stand until it gets dark, making sure that they remain protected. And then after Shabbos, u'meivion, you will bring them inside a protected area, daf tzadikei on the base. However, continues the Mishnah, Ubisakana. What's the sakana? This is Rashi writes, you are afraid of listim. We'll see in the Gemara later, there's another type of sakana, and that is there are times that the government in which the Yidden are living under do not allow us to wear tefillin. And we'll see how this is negeya to the Mishnah, because the solution that we are giving, especially if the sakana is from the government, is not resolved. So machasan v'ha'ilachoi. Tanach says, well, you have no option. There's a danger. So, if you're going to go back and forth, you're going to get robbed. Cover them. Hopefully no one will notice them. Rabbi Shimon says, again, this goes on the sakana of listim, not sakana of the government. Do something, which is, if you have a lot of people present, make a chain of people. So as long as no one is taking it more than daladamis, then no one is violating Shabbos midoraisa. Noisem lechaveiroi, v'chaveiroi lechaveiroi, ad shemagia lechatzer achitzoinom. And as the Goen Yankov and the other point out, hold on, if we're trying to carry it in a way that no one is violating an Isser Doiraisa, just to speak out the first Mishnah on Shabbos, okay, no one is carrying it Daladamas. It's all inside Daladamas. But what about the last person? The last person that's standing outside the Reshus HaYachid, if he's going to place it in the Reshus HaYachid, even though it's B'toich Daladamas, but he was Moitzim Reshus HaRabam Reshus HaYachid. So another detail, when a Yechayv Hoitzah, Akira and Hanacha. But if the person that it's right near the house, he brings it in the house, but he doesn't put it down. Someone else takes it from his hand. Remember that? We're learning this Bashkacha Pratis now on the Rambam. So then he only made the Akira, but he didn't make the Hanacha. He doesn't put it down. Someone in the house takes it from him. Then no one violated the Nisur Doiraisa. Now, guys, if there's a sakana from the government, it became much worse, because if you're trying to hide the fact that we're wearing tefillin, now it's a lot more visible. Many more people are involved saving the tefillin. That's the Rashi. The sakana is when there's listim. That means if you are by yourself, that's where listim pounce on you. Groups, there's safety in groups. So form a chain and do it in a way that you're not machal Shabbos midorais. And likewise, this heted of no one carrying something more than daladamis is also the chein benoi. For example, a woman gave birth out there on the field. Now you have to bring the child back in. Yeah, I know about the sugya. We'll speak more details in the Gemara. But that will be a case where you have an issue of carrying. No one should carry it more than daladamas. Okay. Says Rabbi Yehuda, again, all this will be more clarified in the Gemara. We are basically saying, Reb Shimon, you have tefillin, you have benoi, so you have an excuse to use a heter of not carrying more than daladamas. Rabbi Yehuda says you don't need that. You don't need to have a extenuating circumstance. You're looking for psazai heter. No, this concept can always be used. And now he adds a detail. That's the choices that we read. Now we're coming into Hilchas ERUVIN. What did we learn? That when I'm bound, which I am bound to a tchum, everything that belongs to me is bound to my tchum. And Rabbi Yehuda is saying that the barrel, number one, you can circumvent Isur by taking it, everyone is carrying it less than daladamas. And even if the barrel is going beyond where its owner's tchum would have allowed it to go, you can also do that. So the Chachamim say, how can you say that? That's the whole din of tchumen, that the tchum Shabbos affects that which belongs to me. Guys, every single part of the Mishnah is going to be further elaborated in the Gemara. Let's go back to the Mishnah, to the Reisha. The Reisha is speaking about tefillin. Now we're going to learn Nochas tefillin. So it says the Gemara, the Tanach holds zug echad in tefilloi. So asks the Gemara, will that mean that our stam, because the Mishnah doesn't say what the Tanach is, right? Rab Gamliel is the shnaim, but there's no author. So, and normally it fits the pattern of a stam Mishnah being like Rabbi Meir. But l'choira, our Mishnah will not be like Rabbi Meir, because the Rabbi Meir, we know that Rabbi Meir holds regarding dinim that we learned in Shabbos, that if there's, God forbid, a fire in a house, and there is a limit to how much you can salvage, when it comes to your begadim, so you can wear your begadim, go outside, get undressed, go back in, get dressed, go back in. So the question there is, we had a machlekes tanoim, how many pairs can you wear at the same time? Which sounds similar to the machlekes in our Mishnah, one zug, or Rabbi Gamliel says, shnayim, right? Two. And what did we learn over there? Loivish kol mashiach alilbosh. That Rabbi Meir holds that you cannot wear only one shirt. You can put on 10 shirts, 10 jackets. And wrap yourself, not with one talos, with many talesos. And where did we learn this? The Tanan, this is Shabbos Daf Kuf Chaf. Ulisham to the Chatzir, from that burning house to the Chatzir, Moitzi Kol Kalei Tashmishoy, and Velevish Kol Mashiach Alilbosh, Oitz Kol Mashiach Alatoif. Now, even though the Mishnah there in Shabbos doesn't say Divrei Rav Meir, but I know that Mishnah is Because it says in a brisa, which is further elaborating details of this Tana, that loivish umaitzi upaishet v'loivish umaitzi. But Peshet is explaining that wear as many pairs as you could. He's just teaching, and you go out and you take them all off, and then you go back inside, you do it again, and you can do that kol hayom kuloi. And there clearly it says divrei Rav Meir. So we know that that is Rabbi Meir. If our Stam Mishnah would have been Rav Meir, then why would he only say one zug? So Amar Rava Afilu Tema Rabbi Meir. Our Stam is Rabbi Meir. How can you compare one case to the other? Over there, Derech Malbushay Kechol Shavyuha Rabbanon. The Chachamim allows you, when you have to rescue your garments, to dress the way you at least sometimes dress in the weekday. Let me ask you, how many over your body? We have a undershirt because the wool is not comfortable. Then we have a talus cotton. Then we have a shirt. This Hasidish, you have a vest. Then you have a jacket. Then you have a sweater. Who knows? In other words, people wear more than one malbush. Not always, but sometimes. That's why Rav Meir is lenient. Here you have to get the tefillin. Okay, the Chachamim allow you to do on Shabbos, like we said, derech malbush. At least it should be like sometimes in the weekday. And like the Gemara speaks out over there, since the bechoil kama the boy lavish, even by pants, asazei kalt. Today maybe you have the Hasidish underpants, whatever you call them. But I'm saying people, if you're cold, people wear for malbush, people wear more than one layer. So therefore, even if it's a hadei, at least it's not completely out of the, unusual, unheard of. But over here, since the bechoil, now we're going to get into this whole topic. Yeah, we know people that wear 2 pairs of tefillin, but that's coming back already to this machlokes tanoi. The bechoil nami only zug echad in tefilloi, so even Rav Meir will hold the inatzol nami zug echad in tefilloi. And now let's go weiter. Rabban Gamliel holds, no, shnaim. So my kosova. Now from here until the end of the Amid, and we're going to stop in the middle, and we're going to continue tomorrow to learn a whole gewaldige different ways of understanding the machlokes between Tanakama that we are assuming now Rav Meir and Rabban Gamliel. So straight to Gemara, what does Rabban Gamliel hold? I kosova Shabbos zman tefillin. Now, just to get something very clear. If Shabbos is man tefillin, and the reason why de facto we no longer wear tefillin on Shabbos is only because the Chachamim were afraid that if you're going to wear tefillin on Shabbos, you might end up taking it off on the street and carrying it more than daladams. But if midoiraisa Shabbos is a zman tefillin, so now that there's a fear that the tefillin will get desecrated, appreciate. There's no special allowance that they needed to make, right? You don't even need derech malbush. You don't need takshit. You don't need any of that. If Shabbos is man tefillin, that would explain why you can wear it. Since there's a sakana, go back to the din Torah. You're wearing it not derech malbush. You're wearing it from mitzvahs tefillin. But if that's the case, then zug echad in and tfei loy, then you should not be allowed to carry more than one. Now I know that there's Rashi and Tosfos, which are different, but even Rashi speaks out the concept of Bal Tosef. So here we'll learn Tosef just to make it a little bit simpler. If Shabbos is man tefillin, whenever you're obligated to wear tefillin, wearing 2 pairs, listen to the words here we're learning, is called Bal Tosef. Amazing. If Shabbos is not Zman Tefillin, and the reason why you are giving a heter to wear the tefillin is because it's like a tachshit, it's derech malbush. We're putting these things together as the Rishonim put. So then there's no issue of Bal Tosef. Then the issue is it derech malbush to wear 2? That like we just learned above. But if Shabbos is man tefillin, ironically, wearing 2 now is also midoiraisa, because God commanded us to put on 1 pair of tefillin. Now, L'Kula Alma, putting 5 parshiyos, that's the classical example of Bal Tosef. But here we are applying it to wear 2 tefillin at the same time. So if Rabbi Gamliel holds Shabbos is lav zman tefillin, which means wearing it is b'chlal connected to a mitzvah. Eloma, why are you allowed to wear it? Umishum hatzala derech malbush sharei rabbanon. If it's derech malbush, and so again, if you're going to argue like Rav Meir does, that since during the week you never wear more than 1 pair of tefillin, So like you can't wear derech malbush, it's not derech malbush. But the moment Rabbi Gamliel, which l'cha'ira holds that also in the week you only wear one pair of tefillin, and the heter is derech malbush, and based on that he's allowing two. So why not three and why not four? Afilu tvei nami. So the Gemara says, indeed, first of all, la'olam kosavar Shabbos lav zman tefillin hu. If Shabbos would be zman tefillin, wearing two at a time would be a biblical violation of Baal Tosef. Let's go derech malbush. If I'm going to put a sock on my hand, that's not derech malbush. In other words, derech malbush has to fit the malbush. Now, interestingly, again, we're going that Rabbi Gamliel holds that you only wear one pair of tefillin at a time. I'm mentioning this just to speak out clearly. We have really four pairs of tefillin. We have two completely different sets, Rashi and Abinu Tam. In the week, you only wore one at a time. But when can we understand, when can we view the tefillin like a malbush? That's if you are wearing it in the place where tefillin has to be worn. B'makayim tefillin. And you know what? Two pairs can fit b'makayim tefillin. So the Gemara says, let's take out the word nami. Bach takes out nami. But tefilloi, I don't get it. B'makayim tefillin, there's only room for one. So the Gemara says, no. Amar Rav Shmuel, Rabbi Yitzchak, Mokoim yesh beroish lo haniach boi shtei tefillin. Because as we all know, that even though the Torah says the words beinei necha, we know halacha l'moshe misinai, the oral Torah, beinei necha, dafka lav beinei necha, it means in the area on the head where there's hair, up until the area where the skull is soft by a baby, as we'll learn in a moment. And if the tefillin is very small, you can have two pairs, beinei necha. The lower one is not going to go beyond the hairline, and the upper one is not going to go beyond the area where by a baby the skull is soft, it can fit. But all of that will only explain hanicha, the tefillin deroish. But the yad ma'ikala meimar, that's the kashes who answers the Gemara. Try number one. Here I'll tell you, Kid Rav Huna. If a person is going and schlepping, and as we also learned this in Shabbos, in certain locations, people put them, you go today to Brazil, in the outlying areas, people carry on their head. And if you want to use your head as to carry a pekel, but there's a certain bizoin of the tefillin, so you take off the tefillin of the head, where do you put it? Don't put it in your pocket. You know where you should put it? You should tie it on your arm. Tying it on the arm, according to this first approach, is not that it will fit in the location where you have to put it. But since sometimes people take off the head tefillin and they put it on their arm, let's call that derech malbush, so that's why you can put two on the arm. So sometimes you wear two on the arm. Sometimes it's okay. The Gemara pushes back. All he meant to say is that when you take off the head tefillin, putting it in your pocket is derech bizoyin. Here we're speaking about where you don't have a cover, you don't have a kisui, you don't have a bag. So it's more respectful to tie it on your arm. But roi, it's not roi. And let's go back. If Rab Gamliel only holds that derech malbush is b'makoim tefillin, you don't have a raya from Rav Huna that on the hand there is a b'makoim to put two pairs of tefillin. So the Gemara says, okay, so you don't know it from Rav Huna, but that's the way it is. Just like he said that makom yesh b'rosh shoroi l'niach boi shtei tefillin. I want you to know that hachinami makom yesh b'yad shoroi l'niach boi shtei tefillin. So here we have the first approach is Rabbi Gamliel holds Shabbos is lav zman tefillin. If Shabbos would have been zman tefillin, then you're over a Baal Tosef. Eloma, you are wearing it derech malbush, so we're 20. Derech malbush is only b'makom tefillin, Gewaldik, and that only allows you for two. Says the Gemara weiter, Tana devei Menashe. We learned in the Shiva of Menashe the following brisa that when it says in Pashas Vo Es Chanon, Baruch Shartom Lois Al Yodecha, what does Yodecha mean? Not clear in the written Torah, but we have the oral Torah. So we know that it means Zukiboid is the bicep, with pratim in that as well. The lower half of the area of the bicep that we put tefillin on. Beinei necha doesn't mean beinei necha. See, yodecha includes everything. Kiboidis is a place of the yodecha. By the beinei necha, we're going more. It's not in between the eyes. It's dafki is kotkoid. And hecho, we're in the kotkoid, we're on top. Is before it becomes hardened, where it's reifus, where it is soft. Okay, let's chaparine another few lines over here. Says the Gemara, Lema, perhaps that the machlokes Tanakama and Rabban and Gamliel is b'derav Shmuel, but Rav Yitzchak Miflagi. That will be Gamaldik. That the Tanakama lays the Rav Shmuel but Rav Yitzchak. Notes the Tanakama holds like Rabban Gamliel. Shabbos loves man tefillin. The issue of wearing two is not the chalba bal toisef. The issue is you want to use a heter derech malbush. Fine, derech malbush is only b'makim tefillin. Maybe that's the machlokes. That the Tanakama doesn't hold yesh makim baroish to put two pairs of tefillin, nor in the hand. And Amgamliel is later Rav Shmuel by Yitzchak. Perhaps that is the machlokes. Says Gemara, not necessarily so. Could be, but lav dafka. Loy. I can argue that the Kula Almei they hold over Rav Shmuel by Yitzchak. However, this is the machlokes. V'hachem Shabbos man tefillin. The Tanakama holds Shabbos zman tefillinu, and therefore you're over on bal toisef if you wear tefillin. Here Rashi also writes, like I mentioned, Rashi also mentions the bal toisef. Umishum hatzalo lenishro leitfei min mitzvah the la tachsheninu. Right? No, the moment you say it's zman tefillin, then there's no dispensation given. Zman tefillin means that the Chachamim don't allow you midrabanan to wear tefillin on Shabbos because you might end up taking it off. And here they say, no, we're not goyzer. But you're wearing it as the mitzvah. And therefore, Rashi says also, the kivan, the zman tefillin, who the ike bal toisef. So Rashi adds this nuance. So now that there's a bal toisef, it becomes a masui. And Rabban Gamliel savar Shabbos loves zman tefillin. So yes, a dispensation is given that on Shabbos it's called a tachshit. It's not derech masu, but you only say that if you wear b'makim tefillin. The boy, you say, let's chop one more. This is so good. I'll tell you that everyone holds that Shabbos is man tefillin. Wow. And I'll go more. Shabbos is man tefillin. So why isn't there bal toisef? And like Rashi says, if you're over on bal toisef, then it's a problem of a masui, a side of the bal toisef. How great is this? Now there are two girsos in our Gemara, and we are going to read the Gemara Lefi, the second girsa Rashi that begins 3 lines before the bottom of the page in Rashi. I'll just read it in the Gemara. The Tanakama holds that Lot says, Rashi adds the girsa loy boy kavana. This is gavaldik. Think about it. If you need to have kavana when you do a mitzvah, you know what that also means? What's the other side of the coin? For me to violate bal toisev, I needed to do it l'shem mitzvah. And if it's in addition, then I'm over on bal toisev. If the mitzvah itself needs kavana, then you cannot be over on bal toisev if you're not doing it l'shem mitzvah. Beautiful. Because if mitzvah strichas kavanah, it's not a mitzvah without kavanah. The Tanakama that holds, that's the loy that Rashi adds. That Lot says loy boya kavanah. So according to the Tanakama, when you wear 2 pairs, you're not wearing it l'shem mitzvah. You're wearing it to save it from it being desecrated. It doesn't matter. But since mitzvahs loy strichas kavanah, and we're going to go that Shabbos, yes, zman tefillin. So if you're wearing 2, it's a mitzvah. You didn't have kavanah, doesn't matter. Bal toisef. Number 1, Rashi adds, and if it's bal toisef, then right away you can't say it's a tachshit. Now it's a maso. You don't want to be over a bal toisef, so you can't wear more than 1. Rabban Gamliel holds that what? That again, I'm reading this. I know we have here loy boya kavana, but I'm reading inside. Look inside the last line, just to finish the Rashi inside. Gamliel savar tzricha is kavana lotzis yidei chavasi. He has a different years. So therefore, since tzricha is kavana, but bal toisef loy omar. Add the mechavan lemitzvah. You're not doing mechavan lemitzvah. Beautiful. And that's why you could wear 2. Now, why not 3? That goes back to what we learned before. Because it has to be, if you're saying that it's this Shabbos man tefillin, even more, you can only wear it where you're obligated to wear it. That's the mitzvah. It has to be b'makim, and everyone subscribes not only that yesh beroish, that the makim yesh beroish lo niach by shtei tefillin. The same thing is also biyad, God willing, to be continued. Mamash, we left off on top of the Amud, which is great.
Rabbi, do we understand the beginning of the Mishnah that they all hold, they meaning the Tanakama and Rabban Gamliel, that it's better to you personally put on a pair of tefillin and carry it that way than to do the passing one person to the next, the way Reb Shimon.
We're gonna learn about this soon. Yeah, for sure. If not like Rabbi Yehuda, Danny. It was according to Rabbi Yehuda, this idea of chaver lechaver is mutar lachatchila. Same thing. According to the Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon, we only say that the concept of chaver lechaver, Rabbi Shimon, we only say chaver lechaver when there's a need. So maybe it's better to wear it than to do a chaver lechaver.
Go ahead.